What was thought to be just a regular simple week of the XFL with nothing too crazy happening, it actually turned out to be one of the best weeks of football this entire season, with us having 4 really good games with lots of scoring and great plays throughout the weekend, and plenty to talk about as we still have one more week left of the regular season and many more things needing to be figured out. Hey, how you doing? If you're enjoying what you're watching, please hit the like and subscribe button as we have much more XFL content and future NFL content coming back to the channel. So, let's talk about it. To kick off the weekend, we had the first matchup between the Vegas Vipers and the Houston Roughnecks, who's already clinched a playoff berth. Though, with the playoff berth already clinched, Houston and Brandon Silvers would struggle badly against the Vipers' D by turning over the ball twice on back-to-back drives to start the game, along with Brandon Silvers throwing a pick later on. With those mistakes, Vegas would capitalize with 2 passing touchdowns from Jalen McClendon, with both being play-action passes to his receivers. But Houston would be revived by the defense, scoring 2 huge touchdowns with 2 scoop and scores. One from linebacker Tavante Beckett, recovering the sack and returning it back for 30 yards. And then the other was from DB Ajeen Harris, as he ripped the ball out of Martavis Bryant's hands like taking candy from a baby, taking it and scoring for the touchdown. With the resurgence of the Roughnecks in this game, the offense would march down the field with Max Borghi pounding the rock to score the first of 2 rushing touchdowns for the Roughnecks offense. After a Vegas field goal to start the fourth quarter, Max Borghi would start the drive with a 37-yard hard-nosed run, breaking tackles to set up a great play on offense with a direct snap to backup running back Bryson Allen as he dives his way to extend the lead. The Vipers would continue fighting as they'd score a big-time touchdown with a rush from running back John Lovett for 25 yards, taking the edge of the defense and outrunning everybody. Though Vegas couldn't stop the Houston rush attack as they'd score a field goal to extend their lead 28-21. Then, with some bad time management and a questionable decision-making by the Vipers offense in the last drive, they'd end up losing to Houston as the Roughnecks would clinch home field advantage for the playoffs. After that game, we had another hell of a game as we had the Orlando Guardians traveling to play the San Antonio Brahmas. Orlando would get an early lead with Quinton Dormady lobbing it up to tight end Jordan Thomas as Thomas would moss the DB trying to cover. Orlando would extend that lead coming off another fake punt this season as the Orlando punter chucked it up to wide receiver KD Cannon for 69 yards. Unlike St. Louis though, Cannon did get caught before the end zone, setting up a Devin Darrington touchdown as he'd have a monster day on the ground for the Guardians, having 133 total rushing yards. San Antonio would come back at halftime with a rushing touchdown of their own with running back Jaquise Patrick for 6 yards, making the score 14-10 at halftime. After a field goal to start the second half for the Brahmas, quarterback Jack Cohn would have his best game since week 2 when they played Orlando for the first time. Cohn would rattle off some great passes one after another, including a great one for 28 yards with pressure in his face to tight end Travis Toivonen, getting a catch and run after breaking a tackle to the end zone. Then, after a Jaquise Patrick fumble and Orlando field goal, Quinton Dormady would try to throw a dump pass to his running back, but linebacker Drew Beasley would make a game-changing play, jumping the pass and picking it off for a pick 6, already topping his day as he's had a sack and a half already. Orlando would keep fighting as Darrington would break off another big run for 59 yards until he was caught inside the 5-yard line. That play would set up a quick play action from backup quarterback DeAndre Francois for the score. But after a failed 2-point attempt, the Brahmas would just run the ball out until the clock said zeros and San Antonio would win 25-23. On to the Sunday games. We started with a game that started out rough for Arlington, but would keep fighting the entire time as the Renegades would travel to play the DC Defenders with their rowdy crowd. DC would have 3 passing touchdowns to start the day in the first half, with Jordan Ta'amu throwing 2 great balls in the red zone to his receivers, including Lucky Jackson, who'd catch the 3rd passing touchdown instead from backup quarterback Derek King. Now, I understand having Derek King as a Taysom Hill type quarterback. That's basically another athlete that can throw the ball. But I didn't see the need to sub in King for a whole couple of drives when you already have a guy like Tamu who's been balling all year, because putting King in would eventually bite DC later. For Arlington, they were still rocking with Luis Perez at the quarterback spot since he started for them for the first time last week. And he did well for a guy who's been in the system for only 2 weeks, looking like he knew the offense inside and out and even telling the receivers where to line up before the play. Luis would start his day by scoring a touchdown to wide receiver Caleb Van Der Esch, making a great play for 25 yards, making the score 20-9 at halftime. Though Luis Perez would have a rough second half start as he'd be pressured to throw a bad pick, former NFL vet DJ Swearinger returning it back for 62 yards. Arlington would get a pick of their own eventually at the end of the third, as DB Joel Powell would get his 4th pick of the season and return it for 90 yards to what was thought to be a pick 6, but was scratched off due to a penalty. The Renegades offense would take advantage by running it in on the goal line with Mr. Reliable running back Devion Smith. Arlington would get another huge interception late with 5 minutes left from backup quarterback Derek King, throwing a very bad pass to keep the Renegades alive. Luis Perez and the offense would march down the field all the way to the goal line to finally score after a good fight from the D. But Devion Smith would get his 2nd rushing touchdown, bulldozing his way to make it a 3-point game. Then, after a good 4th and 15 attempt, Arlington would tie the game with a 27-yard field goal to go into overtime. In the 3rd overtime this season, both defenses would keep fighting, not allowing a score until Jordan Tamu would make a great conversion throw to Josh Hammond to score the game-winning score. With that, DC clinches home field advantage, and Arlington will have to beat Houston in order to make the playoffs. To end the week, we had the game with the biggest stakes of the week by far, because the Seattle Sea Dragons, with their season on the line, had an amazing game against the Battlehawks at home, trying to clinch the 2nd playoff spot for the XFL North. Seattle would start hot early on as they'd score off a 12-play drive, ending with a rushing touchdown from TJ Hammond. St. Louis would score a field goal shortly after that, and then after a penalty taking away a Seattle score, A.J. McCarron would throw a wide open pass to Darius Shepard as he makes the catch and run for 42 yards and the touchdown. Ben DiNucci would respond to that score with a bomb to Josh Gordon on a 4th down to set up a score from Ben DiNucci rolling out of the pocket and throwing an absolute dime to Jordan Vesey. Then, after a poorly thrown pick from A.J. McCarron trying to make a play, we'd go into halftime 14-9. The Sea Dragons would continue to take control offensively with another huge catch and run play from Ben DiNucci as he'd fire a dart to wide receiver Jacour Pearson, making another huge play this year as he'd make a couple men miss before turning on the Jets and outrunning everyone for 68 yards. St. Louis would hit a 54-yard field goal to keep themselves in it, while Seattle would miss their own 52-yarder, and the dome in St. Louis would almost blow off because of that miss. The crowd would continue to go crazy as Seattle tried to end the game early with a bomb from Ben DiNucci, but instead would be picked off because he threw it into double coverage. Even though the crowd was hyped and all excited for those brief moments, the Dragons would blow those hopes and dreams all up into flames as DB Bryce Thompson, after having a great game already, would make a great play, making the interception and setting up a Seattle offense near the goal line. With that poor mistake from McCarron, Ben DiNucci would basically do the unthinkable and run over a linebacker for the score and knocking him out.
He needs some milk.
With that score, Seattle would win the ballgame 30-12 and have another great opportunity to make the playoffs alongside the DC Defenders. With that, we have one more week left and still having some major playoff implications. So, let's talk about the XFL North first. With DC already going, the 2 fighting teams for that spot is Seattle and St. Louis. And to be honest, I don't see them losing either of their matchups this week against Vegas or Orlando, as both Seattle and St. Louis will be at home, and they obviously don't want to lose. With that, it wouldn't surprise me if Orlando or Vegas would try to ruin one of the other team's chances and get an upset. For the XFL South, the biggest game for the week is Arlington hosting the Houston Roughnecks. And if the Renegades win, they will make it into the playoffs to then have a rematch the following week against the Roughnecks. But if Arlington loses, then it'll be a tie between Arlington and San Antonio if they win their game against the DC Defenders. But that's the thing with both of these scenarios. If there is a tie to happen to either division, then the league will go through different tiebreakers with combined points, yards, wins, losses, and more throughout the season. And with that, my final guesses to make it is going to be the Arlington Renegades on the XFL South side and the Seattle Sea Dragons in the XFL North. Alright, and that's going to end the video for this week. Please let me know in the comments what you think of my guesses, and let me know on who you think is going to be moving on to the playoffs next week. Other than that, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and have a good one.